Awesome. I appreciate it. Wanted to ask a couple questions. How many of you are working on AI or using AI in your jobs right now? Can I get a show of hands? Okay. How about in your personal life? Okay. It should be just about anyone who has a cell phone or who has anything like that. It's in so much of what you're what you're doing. All right, let's talk a little bit about us first. I think you got an intro, but basically, Orthogonal was founded to help improve patient outcomes faster. We do this through software. We help medtech firms bring more modern methods in and accelerate the development of SAMD. All of this is really heavily based on fast feedback loops, modern methods within the regulated space. We work with a lot of different companies, from startups to mid-size and large medical device companies to folks like Google and Bose and Oura that have medical device software or medical devices as part of what they're doing. Everything from digital therapeutics to a lot in the continuous glucose monitor, insulin pump space, nerve stimulators, and especially over the last 3 or 4 years, more and more work in orthopedics, and in particular in things like surgical planning, surgical robotics, digital implants, and the ecosystems around all of that. So the goal today is really, providing a framework for how AI can add value within your medical devices, how it can add value around the medical devices, and then the concept of the AI factory and why you guys need to be thinking about that going forward. I'm going to start by kind of stepping back and sort of like framing this outside of the medical device industry. One of my favorite quotes, and really seminal for us as a company, was Mark Andreessen's article in 2011 in the Wall Street Journal, headline, "Software is Eating the World." And in all sectors in the future, every company will become a software company. And we've seen this more and more all throughout the industries, and increasingly in the medical device space. Software is becoming a bigger and bigger part of everything we're doing. So if we think of what has happened since 2011, all of these IoT devices, super impressive, powerful smartphones that are in everyone's pockets and people can't live without, all the data that is created by that, all the software that is using that data and generating more data, and now ever increasingly powerful AI that actually consumes that data, provides insights, inferences, and actually makes all of that happen faster. You can see that by every year I do this particular slide on how much these companies are worth, and new companies that weren't on this list before, right? This is how much these companies that are all in software, in data, in infrastructure, in AI, or the chips that support all of those things, that's how much they're worth right now. It's mind-boggling. I used to work for Microsoft when they were really, really big, and kind of, the 800-pound gorilla, they went down, and here they are again. They're worth so much more than they were when I worked for them. So we have to think about AI in a couple of different ways. A lot of what we are seeing, especially in the medical device space right now, is what we'd call narrow AI, right? It's learning, but it's not self-aware. The way I typically think of it is, we could generate algorithms for doing certain things before. We could construct them. If we direct an AI algorithm, it's going to find a more efficient algorithm faster, and we can test that and then deploy that algorithm. That's how we're using it right now. It's very narrow AI. Where we're going is towards general AI. That's what we're seeing with foundational models, with generative AI. That's kind of the first step. That is based on a foundational model where they have sucked in all this data and sort of drawn inferences and made kind of a picture of the world in some ways, or an interpretation of the world. And you can use it as a general purpose tool. So you can go to generative AI and ask it to write a poem in Toki Pona, which is a constructed language. It can do that. You can ask it to make your resume better, and it can do that. And then it can also take the latest article in The Economist that talks about a study for what are effective CVs and what are not effective CVs and add that in there. It can answer all of these types of questions, and right now it's mostly a prompt architecture, right? You can use it like my brother does to, he composes songs, and actually instrumentation, voices, all of that can be generated through AI, and he publishes songs on Spotify as a hobby that are actually pretty impressive, right? So it has all of that in there. It is much, much faster. You don't have to put the work in to say, okay, go do this. We're going to study this. It already has a foundational model. We're using both of these in and around medical devices now. Right now, in the medical device, it is pretty much strictly narrow AI. So another way of thinking of this is there's kind of two parts to this, right? There is making predictions, and then there is judgment, right? If you think about sort of general AI where you have, an artificial human that can talk to you, whatever, right? That type of thing, that combines both of those things. Where we are right now is much more on the prediction side. The actual judgment is typically still left to a person inside in the medical device space, right? It augments and it helps. The more you have judgment as part of that, the more you can get to full autonomy. And I think we're going to see full autonomy outside of the medical device space much faster than in the medical device space. So there's some frameworks here. In our space, right, we have a whole bunch of potential inputs, clinical systems data, we have provider data, smart device data, patient-reported data, data off of apps, data potentially off of their FICA scores, data from weather, all kinds of things that you have as potential inputs. And then outputs are predictions, new insights, seeing new connections between things, and then eventually sort of breakthroughs that we may get through judgment. I think we're a ways away from that latter part in this space. It'll happen 5 to 10 years earlier in other spaces before it happens here, unless there's a crisis, like we had with COVID, and we saw the types of vaccines that would otherwise the mRNA vaccines would not be on market now, and we wouldn't have the cancer ones that are coming out if COVID had not happened, because the FDA and various other agencies would not have let it through. This is a eye chart here. If these are available later, one of my colleagues pulled this together. There are a lot of different places throughout the life cycle where you can apply AI. Let's talk about AI inside the medical device. This is sort of a chart around how it might work in surgical robotics, and sort of, again, speaking towards where we might go in terms of full autonomy. I can tell you where we're using it right now inside the medical device is in particular in things like surgical planning, right? So let's say we're doing, spinal cord surgery, and we have, say, rods and screws and cages and all of those types of things, right? Taking x-rays, MRIs, et cetera, whatever images we have, and being able to sort of identify quickly where are the vertebrae, where are measuring those things, and then actually laying out where the screws should be, where the cages should be, and the shape and size of a rod. That's the kind of stuff that we're using it for now. It sort of speeds the process up for people in surgical planning. It doesn't replace an engineer, it does not replace a surgeon, but it speeds up their work in the same way that a surgical robot does, right? The surgical robot is not necessarily autonomously doing these things now, but we can pull this in and then the surgical robot will go exactly where it needs to go, but it's still up to a physician, a surgeon to actually say, yes, we're in the right place, let's go do these things. It just speeds up that process and makes it better, right? So that's how we're using it, turning 2D images into 3D models automatically. That is the type of thing, and that's really throughout the medical device space right now. That type of work, radiology, anything with imaging is where the vast majority of FDA clearances are right now. It's going to be a while before we get things that are in the device that are learning as they go, and even more so to get to autonomy, just because of the risk that is involved with that, and we don't really have the paradigms for managing that risk. I was just in a meeting with Jeff Shuren, the head of CDRH, last week, and he was talking about all of their work in AI, and he said, look, for a lot of where AI is going, we don't have the paradigm yet, nor, frankly, do they have the regulatory authority to allow for the kinds of things that we could be seeing and that are probably going to be safe and effective before we have the tools to work on that. I think we're going to see a lot more around the medical device and the process of the total life cycle of medical devices before we see really breakthrough things inside the device. If you think about it, a lot of this is about anytime you have a process that throws off data and that you can apply data to, it's ripe for AI. So if you think about your entire life cycle of development all the way through, there are so many potential places for AI to be applied. I can say, like, for our company, I was fairly skeptical for the use of AI in how we develop medical device software for a while, but my CTO loaded a large language model on his laptop and started to show me a whole bunch of things that we could do, and it was pretty jaw-dropping for us, right? So there are things we are doing now. So our software developers have basically, AI co-pilots in their IDE. As they are doing things, those AI co-pilots are saying, oh, here, this isn't how best practices are, you should do it this way, or here's a code snippet, or here's something you've done before, or your company's done before that might apply here, or before you actually check code in, it's actually check in saying at appropriate times, oh, you have issues. That makes a expert developer like 1.5 to 2 times as productive, depending on what they're doing, and has an even greater effect on a mid-level developer, right? That's pretty cool for us. I can get a lot more done and have fewer errors, fewer issues with security issues, et cetera, as part of that. Also, in the process of looking at, say, our requirements, how we do testing, we can apply large language models and say, hey, look at this, and do we have well-formed user needs, well-formed requirements, are acceptance criteria written in good Gherkin syntax? If not, can you help me correct that? And again, provides quality control and an aid to that. Again, covers a lot of things that we discover things and manage things earlier, and makes our systems engineer, our quality people, a lot more productive, right? These are all processes where we have data and we have best practices that can be codified in a large language model and brought through. So I think this applies to any of these processes. We're certainly doing this when we're doing remediation as well. This is sort of the process of getting the lay of the land and seeing, okay, where are the issues potentially, as long as we have access to the data and it is digital, et cetera, we can get there much, much quicker and be very targeted at that kind of thing. So you can use this. We haven't done this yet, but we're working with some folks to be able to predict kind of potentially results of inspections, right? And or potentially predict recalls, other types of things based on the data we have. This is something that you can then also, for example, use if you're acquiring a company. You're going to have less data before you acquire the company than afterwards, but you can do a lot of assessments, again, very quickly with things like large language models. And then the 6 months you have to clean things up after you acquire a company, well, you can really go to town. That's a heavy duty understanding what's where the potential issues are. So I think there's huge potential in this. We're going to see lots. We see this in lots of industries. I think we're going to see more and more of that. I've seen it in my company. We are definitely way more productive and better, higher quality, fewer issues, and fewer black swans, shall we say. I think another area where we're starting to see this, and I think we're going to see this more and more, is kind of the entire ecosystem around your devices. I would say looking at, say, the patient journey end to end, these are all processes that throw off data and can be used to actually sort of improve lots of things throughout the process. I think the more we see things like bundling, things like paying attention to sort of outcomes and using those to improve the process, the more that ends up being part of the financial picture for companies, the more critical and the more important all of this is. There's a good example of this. Zimmer Biomet bought a company called MyMobility, and then they also built ZB Edge. And MyMobility is kind of an end-to-end process from planning all the way through to discharge, and then the rehab, right? And they have apps, and they have plans, and they have an entire end-to-end ecosystem where they're collecting all of this data and also sort of managing that process. And then within the surgery, they have ZB Edge, and they have all of this data, and they have been able to actually now use this for AI discovery and then injecting some of those algorithms back in to actually improve parts of that process. We'll get to the AI factory a little bit later, but this is a place where the AI factory is potentially really valuable. Similarly, you can look at things with clinician flows. It all depends on the types of things you may have. There are things you need to do to get great patient data and to work with those folks. All the consumer skills of engagement, how do you build mobile apps that people actually use? All of those things are important in terms of getting the data. Here, there are more challenges of what access can you get to this stuff, et cetera. But there's tons of things you can do within this space as well, right? An example here, not necessarily a medical device example, but if you look at an operating room. An operating room is big moneymaker for a hospital if it is run more efficiently and you can get more things, more operations through. You're going to make more money. Typically, it is an anesthesiologist who is running the board, making the decisions based on what they know. You could probably have an AI algorithm collecting all of this data, everything from, oh, this surgeon is always late. This surgeon always takes 10 hours for a surgery that someone else takes 3 hours for, et cetera, right? These are more complicated cases. All of these types of things and how much this case might be worth as well. Those are all things you could use to optimize that. This is where AI can be really helpful because it can figure it out much, much faster than we can as people. So the infrastructure that you should think about for this. The first thing I would say is just a mindset thing, right? Is really treating data as an asset with a defined strategy for this. I would argue that as you move forward and software is more and more of what you're doing and it's more and more about ecosystems as opposed to purely a device, data is just as important and potentially just as valuable or more valuable than the device itself. So you have to think about that data and really sort of how much is it going to cost to acquire and to manage that data. It's not free, but some data is cheaper to get. You're already generating it, you just have to collect it. And some data is very expensive, right? We do a lot of work in the diabetes space, and the gold standard for blood glucose monitoring is blood tests, right? So if you want that data, you got to have someone sitting in a hospital or in a setting and blood being drawn for like 2 or 3 days every 10 minutes. That's really expensive, right? So if you're going to use that data, it better be worth it, right? So there's a healthcare economics. I would argue that if you're a large enough company, you should have data economists actually as part of your company as you're thinking about this strategy for yourselves. But certainly collect what you're already creating. Think about third-party data. You can augment a lot with data that's already out there. When you're writing contracts with hospitals, don't give away the data. I've seen this with companies where they wrote the contracts 20, 30 years ago, and they are having to pay the hospitals to use their own data to improve their medical devices. You shouldn't be writing contracts like that now. Invest in that entire process. One of the objections that I have heard, and I've heard this, for the last 30 years, the voices are getting less loud, is we don't want to have all this data because if we're not acting on this data, we could be liable for that. And that is a legitimate concern, but it's 2024. It is not 1985. It is not 1990. And soon it'll be 2026, 2028, et cetera. That data, half of it's already out there, right? And you don't know about it, but your competitors might. Certainly the FDA, various other people might know that as well. You should have that data in the modern world. You can't hide under a rock. It doesn't work that way anymore, right? So that is probably the biggest barrier that I still see with some companies. But I will say this: I won't name companies, but in the cardiac space, there's a number of very large companies that are doing ablations, pacemakers, et cetera. I asked my sister-in-law, who is an electrophysiologist, how do you think about these companies? Which of these do you like? And she described each of these 3 companies. She does pacemakers with a few of them. And said, Company X, yes, they have recalls, but they happen really quickly before I know what's going to happen with it. Company Y, they have recalls too, and they definitely push to the forefront, but those recalls, everyone in the industry already knows that there is a problem there, and then 2 years later, there's a recall, right? That is a less and less sustainable model, because all of that data, at some point, that's going to get published for some of these things. You want to have that data and be able to do things very, very quickly. I talked a little bit about the AI factory before. I think the My Mobility and ZB Edge is a good example of that. They've actually built an AI factory on top of that. It's really, a set of baseline things and then processes on top of that you're doing. So, at the start of it, you've got data collection, right? So how good is the data? How comprehensive is it for what you're trying to do? Then you have data scientists doing exploration and discovery, saying, oh, is there something interesting here? Is there something interesting here? And figuring out and deriving insights that could potentially be used. You're going to figure out, well, how valuable is it? But also, is this a medical device? So doing a regulatory determination, if you say, yes, this is in a medical device, you're going to do formal training. You have a whole bunch of things within your quality management system around AI processes and getting that to filing. You now can take advantage of predetermined change control plans from the FDA as well to sort of increase your leverage for changes you can make without having to do additional filings. And you feed that back into your data collection. There's a whole nother, side here of the stuff you would do outside of the medical device space, right? If the regulatory determination is not that you have to go through that process, it short circuits that and goes much more quickly. At the beginning, I can say, companies we've worked with to build out these AI factories, you start with it'll take 9 months or so maybe to get the first one out and back deployed, right? But you're going to get faster and better, improve the process, improve your technologies, improve automation around this to maybe get the second one, if it's not a medical device, down to 3 months, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can, think about what your measures are around that. If you have lots of data and processes, this is where you're going to end up when you end up having this sort of full data strategy. Some companies are there in parts of their business, but I think everyone's going to need to be there. That's all I had as far as slides. I'm happy to take questions from you guys. Any questions? Yeah.
Thank you. You talked about CDRH and the regulatory processes, that they don't have the paradigms in order to assess the risk.
Mm-hmm.
I know you also have up there that the quality process of your development, right? Having it produce the records of an evidence of change and so on and so forth. How do you validate that? So, in other words, that the records that it's producing as the byproduct. I made a change. I adjusted this in my database. I adjusted this. How do you?
It's a typical software validation process that we use for the different tools that we have, right? And certainly in some cases, so I can tell you what we use. We're very much software is our business. We don't build hardware. Inside we are Jira and Confluence, right? as underlying technologies. We have plugins for risk management, for traceability, for testing, verification, et cetera, right? All of these things are validated, and in some cases, some of these plugins are have validation elements where that validation is run periodically, just as part of the plugin, right? Others, not the case. If we're doing certain things where we're stitching together, GitHub actions with other things, we have to build out more of that, but also we can automate a lot of the software validation, right? In the same way, and if we think about using cloud technology, right? How do you maintain a validated state for these types of things? When it's always changing, right? The cloud is always changing, right? And the answer there is we have to have a different paradigm. In fact, there is a new guidance document we are this close to having published through AMI TIR 115 on cloud computing, where the FDA has asked us to do this. They have participated in the process, as have Medtronic and Boston Scientific and Amazon and Google and Microsoft. So that's actually an answer to some extent to sort of the paradigm shift for this. It is around assurance and around monitoring and around sort of risk mitigation around the things that could go wrong in those environments, right? Yeah, back there.
Hi, first off, great talk. That was excellent.
Thank you.
I remember you mentioned that the only 510Ks, or I guess the general area, has been in image recognition and image diagnosis. But what other areas do you know of that 510Ks have been?
I mean, I'd say that's the vast majority of both PMAs and de novos and 510Ks have been in that. I'd say 85% of that. I think there's a lot of other ones that are, so the next largest is in the cardiac space. So there are, things for algorithms for predicting AFib or various other things like that, right? So that's the next largest. There's some in retinopathy, diabetes, oncology, et cetera. Most of them end up being sort of signal processing and detection or classification. That's the majority of what we have right now. The reason why, like, the imaging is or radiology in particular, is is kind of the biggest one. The driver for that is the nature of how radiology is being conducted. The sort of, gold standard is two radiologists looking at an image. That's still pretty much what is happening right now. So you kind of get the gold standard to compare your AI algorithm to for free, essentially, or close to free, as opposed to something like CGMs, where it's pretty expensive on a per test or per individual basis, right? I think that's one part of it. I think we're going to see some changes there at some point for certain types of things that we will get to the point where the gold standard is no longer two radiologists looking at something. It's going to be another AI algorithm. That's where it's going to get really interesting and complicated. And popcorn for everyone. So,
Thank you.
So I'm wondering if you, in the future, if you see, obviously AI, I think, will grow in many parts of different businesses, right? Companies that offer all types of services or manufacture different products. What do you think will be the main mode that companies move into AI? Do you think it will be developing internal AI expertise within companies or working with partners, and why?
I mean, I think it's going to be a mix on that. So if we think about just the infrastructure, for AI, and sort of, doing baseline stuff. That's something for kind of, it's really expensive. It's for big players. I could see maybe, the largest medical device companies trying that, but it's a general purpose tooling. Leave that to technology, right? Medical device manufacturers shouldn't be making chips either, right? Unless there's some really, really specific reason for it. I think so. I think that part not. I think it's going to be a mix, right? So we do not have 40 data scientists, right? We've got a couple people. We've got some machine learning experts, but we will also partner and pull in people that are, have more general expertise. And I think that's how a lot of companies are going to be. They're going to have some of those enough to be able to sort of tell whether something's real or not, and then work with partners and work inside an ecosystem for that. And then depending on where it is, they may invest more and build out more internal capabilities where it's super strategic.
Sure. And then just a follow-up question. How do you think that AI partners will address security concerns or just data privacy from larger companies? Because I think that might be one of the...
No, it's a big issue, and I think it's one where I would say that medical device companies are more sensitive to this than other folks. So to the extent that these partners care about this market segment, and the bigger the market segment gets, et cetera, certainly the more important it is for folks. And the closer medical device gets to being a software company, the easier it is and better for that. I think we can drive a lot of that, right? And I think even standards and things like that are driving that. Security, cybersecurity. I think there is an opportunity for our industry to sort of lead the way in terms of thinking about ethics. And there's certainly, last week at the AdvaMed board meetings and various meetings in DC, this is something that AdvaMed is advancing, sort of what are our ethical obligations and our security obligations around both the data and the AI that uses that. So I would expect, and there are some companies that already have pretty good stuff around that they're actually sharing with AdvaMed. So I expect publications around that, and that will also help allay some of the concerns that, say, Congress members or senators, et cetera, or the EU assembly, et cetera, might have around those things, right? Trying to get ahead of that.
Thank you.
Can I ask you guys questions? What do you guys see happening? How do you think this is going to affect your company and your jobs?
So I think one way that AI will eventually make its way in, once I think the industry gets past maybe privacy concerns, is development teams are constantly, and teams in general are constantly under pressure to do more with less headcount. And I think there'll be a lot of integration with AI and some basic functions, some stuff that you talked about, where, for example, it'd probably be relatively simple to get an AI structure built into your electronic quality system, where you might have a team of engineers who spends 10% of their time writing protocols, and an AI could pretty easily pull together the 200 protocols you've done over the past 20 years and suggest a template, or maybe even draft it, and then an engineer could review it. So for me, I think it'll be a big aspect of being able to do more with less people, or to mitigate, having to add headcount as you grow.
Makes sense. And then how many of you guys are with large companies, and how many mid-size and small? So large. And small companies? So, large companies have lots of resources, right? But they also move slower. So the question is, as a small company, how are you guys thinking or dealing with this? What are the things that are like most challenging for you around this right now?
Hi, we're actually a consulting firm, but we consult with a lot of tiny firms that are just starting out, and we may be working with their finance people to make sure they're staying in line. I think where we're getting the most stomach aches early on this is how to answer FDA's questions on the security, the cybersecurity of it, how to make sure that it is an enclosed system, that nothing can get in it or out of it, and then the change control
Yeah.
as the data moves, because you're adding to that data all the time, and the results of what you put together yesterday is different than today. How do you control that? Do you need to? How do you document it, and so on? And I think that documentation is the question, because as you said, to do more with less, that documentation is probably going to come from out of the AI. So how do you control
Right.
that? Just keeping that security on it. That's what we're seeing. That's what's giving us a stomach ache about everybody coming up. I have this brilliant idea. I have it patented. I have it in,
Yeah.
I want to take a look at what the regulatory path is. And we're going, oh gosh, what is FDA going to ask us?
Yeah.
What do we need to have more than we've had to have before for software?
Yeah, and I think there's definitely, I think, going to be a growing gap between what's possible and what is probably safe and effective, and what the FDA is going to let through. And I know the FDA understands that. That's one of the reasons why Jeff made the comment that he did last week. So makes sense. I will say another thing that for me is a concern is it's the one that you get with self-driving cars, right? Right now, hey, we have self-driving cars. In theory, they can drive themselves, but what you're supposed to do, what the instructions for use are, is you've got to be on top of it and have your hands in front of it. And you may do that for the first hour, but when it's just working, you're going to step away from that. So, one of my concerns with some of the tools that we have is like, if I'm just letting the tool do the work and I don't, it's very easy to sort of trust the tool. And so what we end up doing is having processes around that, right? There may be 25, 30, 40% of the code written that it was written by AI, but we still have, pull requests, and I have 2 developers going through that. They don't know who wrote what, but they're reviewing that. I have lots of safety checks and things around the processes, so we can ensure that it's a tool that aids, but it's not sort of that we eliminate those risks, or at least ameliorate those risks a lot. So. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.